Hey, sophomores. Today we're going to continue talking about immigration for your asynchronous lesson. For the first class, I'm sorry, period 3, I'm sorry for those technical problems today. That was super annoying. But, lucky we got it sorted. And then the fourth period I had to shorten, so we're all on the same page. But yeah, hopefully everything's all sorted now for our class on next live class on Monday. All right, so we've been talking about immigration. We spent a lot of time in our live class talking about Irish immigration. And then in the video before, we talked about, just immigration trends in the United States and stuff like that, and how that was integral for the United States economy to begin to boom during the market revolution, getting all these new workers from other countries. So we talked about the Irish. Today we're going to focus on the Germans, and after that we're going to talk about some of the backlash that existed to greater immigration in the United States. Now, Germans were the second largest immigrant group to come to the United States after the Irish. Now, I don't know if you learned this in global yet, but there really was no Germany that existed before 1871. So when the big German immigrant wave came in the 1840s, there really was no Germany per se. Germany didn't really exist as a united country till 1871. So what it was instead was a collection of different states: Bavaria, Westphalia, Saxony, Hesse, and on and on. There were a lot of German states with German people who lived there, but it wasn't a united Germany yet. It was different. It was different German states. Now, Germany is a mix of different, what later became Germany, is a mix of different religions. The northern half of Germany is largely Protestant. The southern half of Germany is largely Catholic. I've been to Berlin, which is in northern Germany. I've been to Munich, which is in southern Germany. It's very, very different. Southern Germany, which is Bavaria, has certainly a lot more of a Catholic flavor to it. The former Pope, Benedict, who's still alive but resigned the papacy. He's German. So there's a lot of German Catholics in the south, and most of the north is Protestant. There's also a significant, at least then, there was a significant Jewish population that existed in Germany as well. So when people immigrated to the United States, German immigrants came here. They tended to be more from the Protestant regions, the northern part of Germany, but not entirely. Also, the German immigration to the United States witnessed the first significant influx of Jewish immigrants coming into the United States. There had been a smattering of Jewish immigrants coming to the United States in early American history. I don't know if you learned this, but George Washington famously wrote a letter to the first synagogue that had been built in the United States, which was in Newport, Rhode Island, where he said that in our new country, everybody's going to be free to practice whatever religion they want. So there always had been Jews in the United States, a few, since the Dutch first came to New Amsterdam. But the first significant Jewish immigration to the United States was in the wave of German immigration in the 1840s. So these were German Jews. Anybody who's interested in this, in Jewish history, American Jewish history, German Jews largely came to America in this influx of immigration in the 1840s. Later Jewish immigrants who came from Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, Romania, that's where my grandmother was from. My great-grandparent, her parents were from Romania. So those Jews generally came from who generally came in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So the German Jews generally came a generation ahead of the Eastern European Jews. And why that's important is because in the American Jewish community, there was often a hierarchy between German Jews, who often had more money and more status, and the Eastern European Jews, who tended to be poorer and more religious. But the reason for that hierarchy generally is just because German Jews had a generation head start over the Eastern European Jews. They had been here 40, 50 years, 2 generations actually. They had been here in America a lot longer than the Eastern European Jews. So yeah. Now, most German immigrants who came to the United States, they tended to be farmers, but there were a lot of other people as well, did other things. There were a lot of tradesmen. There were a lot of skilled workers. who actually came from from Germany. It's basically included people from all different vocations. Um, Came from Germany to the United States. Most of the Germans who came to the United States came for political reasons rather than economic reasons. There was a revolution in the German area in 1848. The conservatives won that revolution, and for a lot of liberal Germans, there was a fear that, are they going to be safe living in a country that's now like, where they were on the wrong side of the revolution. So a lot of them came to the United States because of that, for political reasons, which meant two things. One, they tended to be more liberal politically when they came to the United States. Like German immigrants to the United States tended to be really, really anti-slavery. Because remember, these were the more liberal German people to begin with who came. Also, it meant that some of the German immigrants who came to the United States actually had some money. Because again, unlike the Irish who are fleeing for largely economic reasons, the German immigrants are fleeing for political reasons. So they could actually have some money, but then just because they have different political beliefs in the government, they feel that they have to leave, but they still had money. So so that helped a lot, right? So when immigrants come to the United States with some money, it helps get them settled a lot more than immigrants who don't. Like the Irish experience, where they basically had to, take any job that they could, because they had no money and they really had no skills largely. So also, German people tended to settle in the Midwestern part of the country. Even though there were German communities, we talked about this in another video, there were German communities in the East, like New York, Yorkville, what's now the Upper East Side, was the big German area back in the day. Baltimore, Philly, they all had German neighborhoods. But the bulk of German immigrants tended to settle in the Midwest. So Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, that area of the world, because a lot of them wanted to buy farms. A lot of them came to the United States again with more money, so they actually wanted to start lives as farmers. And that was probably the best place to do it. There was a lot of available land, and that, of course, is the agricultural center of our country, the Midwest. Now, when the Germans moved to the United States, they generally maintained pretty separate ethnic communities. So in German areas, day-to-day life was pretty much conducted in German. Newspapers were in German. The schools taught the children in German. There were a lot of German social clubs, and there was less need to actually assimilate into mainstream American culture because it was so self-contained. Because people with all different sorts of skills came to the United States from Germany, and they had dentists, they had lawyers, they had silversmiths, and you name it. So you really didn't have to leave the community in order to do things, right? Like other immigrant groups, like you have to mix with everybody else. Just if you want to go to the store, if you need something done, blah blah blah, you need to go with other people, right? But the Germans didn't have to do that as much because there were so many German immigrants who had a variety of different skills. So Germans could kind of stay pretty self-contained. And a lot of Germans who came to the United States were actually professionals, and and often served other German immigrants. Now the thing is that German immigrants tended to have more positive stereotypes. If that's a bit of a contradiction in terms, I know, but the stereotypes of Germans tended to be more positive than the stereotypes of the Irish. The stereotypes of the Irish were horrible, right? It's they were drinkers, they were brutes, they were corrupt and unclean, and so all sorts of horrible things. But the stereotypes of the Germans tended to be more positive. It tended to be that they were very industrious and they were very hardworking. So they generally had a much better rep in the United States than the Irish immigrants had, even though there were some negative ones. Some people felt the Germans were very clannish; they always stuck together. They really didn't want to blend in with other people. They also had a reputation for drinking too. The German immigrants. So there were some negative stereotypes, but largely the stereotypes of the Germans were more positive. Now, they had a lot of advantages over the Irish in all the ways we talked about, right? Less discrimination in many ways. They had more money. They generally did well in the United States economically, especially compared to the Irish. But there was one big disadvantage. Irish people speak English. Right, so that really helps when you come to the United States, where English is English is the main language in our country. So the thing is that it helps to speak the language. German people did not speak the language, and a lot of German people never even learned the language because again they kind of stuck in these ethnic German communities, so there was really less need to actually learn English. That really didn't change until 19 excuse me, until 1917, until the First World War. Believe it or not. And the thing is that when we were at war with Germany, it certainly wasn't a good thing to be so visibly German. So it was then that a lot of German immigrants began assimilating more into mainstream American culture. But think about it: the German immigrants started coming in the 1840s. That wasn't until 1918. So that's a good 60, 70 years that Germans pretty much maintained pretty separate ethnic communities. Now, Germans tended to be less involved politically than the Irish. Remember, we talked about how involved actively the Irish were in politics, how in many ways they created local government, or at least modern local government, by controlling a lot of the political machines in most of the major cities of America. Germans tended to be less involved politically. They usually voted, but they generally didn't run for office as much, and generally weren't as active in political affairs as the Irish. They generally were pro-business, and as we said, they were very anti-slavery. Their politics were a little bit more mixed than the Irish. The Irish were solidly Democrats. The Germans tended to be Democrats, but less so than the Irish. So I wouldn't say it was a swing vote. It definitely was more of a Democratic vote than it was a Whig vote, and then later a Republican vote. But it was more Democrat, but not to the degree with the Irish. The Irish were solidly Democrats. And immigrant votes became a very important source of support for the Democratic Party. And one of the reasons why the Democratic Party probably was the majority party in America up until the Civil War, it's because they had this coalition of Southerners and immigrants in the North. And that was usually enough to win national elections. It wasn't a huge majority, but it was 51, 52% of the population. The Southerners, the poor farmers, together with the immigrants, was enough for Democrats to usually win national elections. All right, guys, let's talk now about the backlash to immigration. Now, that's always been the case, right? As we've seen in the past few years politically, right? As soon as immigrants come to the United States, there are some people who do not like all these new people coming to our country. And the sheer number of immigrants who came to the United States in the 1840s and 1850s was staggering, right? It was like a 20 to 25% of the entire U.S. population was basically these immigrants, the Irish and the Germans largely, and the English to a smaller extent. And a lot of people were very uncomfortable by that. The way I always kind of think about it is America has had very mixed feelings with immigration. We are a nation of immigrants, right? Everybody in this country, unless you're Native American or African American who were brought here by force, everybody else here is an immigrant, right? Everybody came from somewhere else. But often, sometimes people start feeling superiority over newer immigrants. Like, my people might have been immigrants, but now I'm American, and now I kind of look down on a lot of these newer people who are coming to our country. I think that's bad. Because we're all immigrants, right? It doesn't really make sense, in my view, for an American to be opposed to immigration. But so we pride ourselves on being a nation of immigrants, but at the same time, a lot of Americans get uneasy about the large numbers of immigrants coming in, especially if their cultures are seen as very, very different than the prevailing American culture. So the way I always kind of think about it is America says, welcome. Where we allow immigrants to come in, but there's a large part of the American population that's very uneasy about large numbers of immigrants coming in. So technically welcoming, but always wary of having these great numbers of immigrants in the United States. Now, why? Why do you care if there's immigrants coming into the United States? Well, sometimes Americans feel that they're an economic threat, right? They're going to take jobs away, especially, low-skill jobs. So oftentimes anti-immigrant feeling is particularly strong among the poorer classes because they feel that immigrants are a greater threat to them because they're competition for work. Sometimes it's just sheer bigotry, ethnic bigotry and religious bigotry. Often you just don't like people of a certain ethnicity. You think their ways are strange. You think they won't assimilate. Strange. You think they won't assimilate. They'll never blend into American culture. Their political views might be, unusual to you. Their religion is usually or often quite different, right? Most Americans are Protestant, and a lot of these new immigrants coming in were Catholic. Some were Jewish. So that sometimes made a lot of people uneasy. But there was always among people who are anti-immigrant, and somebody who's anti-immigrant is called a nativist. Nativism means that you oppose immigration. And there was this fear among nativists that there would be this foreign influence in the country that would never assimilate and would harm our unity as a country. Because if you never assimilate, then we're always going to have, in a sense, this foreign element in the United States. So that was pretty much the underlying fear that a lot of nativists had toward large immigrant populations coming into the United States. Now, this is going to be our next one of our next topics in the next couple of weeks. But this big push for public education, that was like a really big deal in the 1840s. This idea that all children have to get a free education. Which wasn't the case before the 1840s. One of the big reasons for that was nativism. There were a lot of people who felt that public schools could actually assimilate immigrant children to American life, teach them American values, teach them Protestant values, teaching them the way to go to be a good American. So the thing is that it's odd because that's great having public schools, but often this whole push for public education did have a bigoted element to it, which is why a lot of Catholic parents did not want to send their kids to public school, which is why the United States developed a very strong parochial school system. Like to this day, right? We have a very strong Catholic school system in America. And that emerged because there was this feeling that public education was basically indoctrination of Protestant values, which a lot of Catholic immigrant parents were very uneasy about. There was, and again, I talk about this in class, and it's kind of forgotten about today, the extent of the anti-Catholic feeling that existed in the United States. It was intense. And again, we've forgotten about it because luckily we've largely moved past that. But to understand American history, that's a very important thing. To kind of just remember just how deep the prejudice was toward Catholics in the United States. An entire group formed to oppose immigration in the United States that actually reached a lot of power politically. It was called the Order of the Star-Spangled Banner. And that was an anti-immigrant, a nativist group, which later became a political party called the Know Nothing Party, which we'll talk about in a few weeks. So the thing is that this was strong anti-immigrant nativist feeling in the United States. It wasn't just like, welcome, everybody just lived here and everyone lived happily ever after. There were a lot of Americans who did not like the fact that all these strange people coming to the United States. But that's always the case. Every time there's a big wave of immigration, there is a blowback against it. It's just, unfortunately, the way it's always been in American life, and we witness it, of course, to this day. Now, and it's one of the things I do want to say that people think that immigrants. One of the common things about anti-immigrant things is that they'll never really assimilate. But every immigrant group who's come to the United States does assimilate. It's just it always happens. Right? Sometimes it takes a little longer. Sometimes it takes a generation or two, but people do assimilate to American life wherever they come from. So this fear that immigrants won't assimilate, it's not well founded, and it's not backed up by historical evidence either. People do want to blend into prevailing American culture, generally. Okay, now lastly, I want to talk. We talked so much about immigration. Let's talk a little about internal migration. It wasn't just that people were coming from foreign countries to the United States. A lot of people were moving within the United States. Americans were moving around a lot during this era in the 1830s, 1840s, into the 1850s. A lot of Americans from rural areas were going to urban areas in search of jobs because the market revolution saw the emergence of factories and mills and all that. New York, Boston, Chicago, all these cities began booming because so many people began moving in from rural areas. And also people were moving to the West. People were moving, we talk about this a lot, but people were moving from New England and upstate New York to the Midwest. That was a very common move for for a lot of people. And the thing is, so that led to pretty you know I would actually say that it was almost to the extent there were almost as many people moving within the United States as moving to the United States from foreign countries. So it's just basically a lot of movement during this period, and the population was booming in the United States. When the first census was taken, every 10 years the government counts all the people. In the first census that was taken in 1790, 4 million immigrants 4 million people lived in the United States. In 1820, it was 10 million. In 1830, it was 13 million. In 1840, it was 17 million. So, and then high immigration after the 1840s just increased the population even more. Increased it into 25 million, to the point where by 1860 we had about 31 million people living in the United States. So think about this: it moved from 4 million 1790 to 31 million in 1860. Now, immigration tripled in the 1840s and it quadrupled in the 1850s. So that was one of the big reasons why the population increased substantially. But another reason was high birth rate. The average American mother had 6 children. On average, about 2 or 3 died in infancy because of all the diseases that existed at the time. But we had a high birth rate and we had a lot of immigration. So the population of the United States was definitely booming during this period. All right, guys. So we will stop. We'll stop there. Please remember to watch these videos from start to finish. And in our next class, we're going to start a new topic. We're going to talk about the Second Great Awakening, when this revival of religious fervor arose in the United States, which led to the emergence of a lot of new reform movements in our country. So I'll see you all on Monday. So remember, watch this video from start to finish, and I'll see you on Monday. Peace.